Another episode of Far Cry New Dawn.
Where he now rests beside his wife, Catherine.
Stop it, Boomer. No, go honey. You lazy fucker. He's like, oh man, it's fucking guy is that guy has I'm
what's the matter? Your grandpa's taking lunch.
There was an adjoining
He's wanting breakfast.
that has since been removed. The tower bell tolled at funerals, one strike for each year of life.
Come here, Boom.
These headstones are a testament to the inherent need in each of us to be remembered after we're gone. They're sort of a compromise we make with time, or perhaps they're just an attempt to get the final word. We don't usually have a choice in when or how we exit this life, but we do have a choice in the way we tell posterity about who we were. Some do it with traditional monuments, while others go for something more unique. Thomas Strawbridge Jr. came to America from Ireland when he was still a boy. He settled in Sangamon County and became the area's first saddle maker. His gravesite is rich in Victorian symbolism and blends rustic elements with more traditional ones. The entrance to his plot features a hitching post that alludes to his work with horses. Thomas was a lifelong bachelor and is buried with his sister Mary. Their names are inscribed on the supports of an arch representing the gateway between the worlds of the living and the dead. On the top of the arch are symbols of wheat which stand for a long, useful life. The roses, the broken tree, and the urn signify death. On either side of the arch are two log chairs. The one on the right is for Mary. Notice how her cloak is draped over the back. The chair on the left is Thomas's, and his hat is carefully placed as if waiting for its owner to return. It's meant to convey the emptiness left in the wake of their passing. Empty chair monuments in all their varying designs fit into the rustic cemetery aesthetic of the late Victorian era, and are common sights throughout sections of Oak Ridge. Two stand over the resting places of William and Jane Moore. William Moore was a contractor who built many public buildings in Springfield, including the north and south porticos of the old State House. Of all the chair stones, there is one that is like no other. It belongs to Patrick Dowling, a popular Springfield saloon keeper. His throne-like chair is draped in symbolism. The vines signify man's relationship with God. I don't know if you've met Nana. The ferns represent humility, frankness, and sincerity. The profound effect of Dowling's premature death is present in the inscription engraved on his monument that reads, "Thou shalt be missed, because thy seat will be empty." Up until about 1930, so-called tree stones were popular monument designs. The broken or severed limbs symbolize a life cut short. This towering monument belonging to the Brandt and Hamer families is one of the more impressive of the type. It is the resting place of George and Mary Hamer, along with 4 of their children, all of whom predeceased their parents. John Brandt is also buried here. He was the husband of George and Mary's daughter, Ida. Both George and John were veteran engineers for the Wabash Railroad. A very similar monument stands a short distance away, but is only a quarter of the size. It belongs to Jeannie Floorhill. When she passed at age 93, she had 2 surviving children, 4 grandchildren, 17 great-grandchildren, and 3 great-great-grandchildren.
Hey, Casey.
She was also noted
grab her real quick before I run the other side of the steps there and she'll go upstairs.
The man who cut Lincoln's hair.
Outside the step.
Yeah.
Erastus Wright was a well-known school.
Where? I got her.
Thank
goodness.
Yeah, just throw her there on the other side of that door and she'll go up.
I'm B, creator of Wikipedia. You know, your one-stop shop for maps and intel. Wikipedia, just the tips. But here's the rub. Wikipedia is in danger. My key assets are all gone. Intel,
Some tree
maps,
stones
you
are
name it.
accompanied by
Now my
smaller
business plan
markers
is
for
missing too.
individuals buried
But
within a family
I know who
plot,
gave me the shaft.
as can be
My
seen around
employee
the
Richard.
George Grant
He's got a
Monument.
real bad gambling habit. Always playing crazy eights with those highwaymen
The
and losing his
monuments we have
pens.
just
He
seen
must
were
have
the
hidden the plan
creation of
somewhere for
Swedish-born
safekeeping. Must
sculptor
they just take it
Edward
from him? They're not
Lavanius.
very nice.
He was
Or
the owner
respectful.
of the 20th Century
The usual
Monument
gambling
Company
place
in
isn't far from here.
Springfield,
If you
and his
spook
early
him, he'll run
engravings
and
were
lead you
all
right to
done
his
by
hiding hole.
hand.
I'm sure of it.
Most
I
tree
don't, but
stones you'll
I've got
find
bad
were
knees.
placed by the Woodmen of the
And
World,
lungs.
a fraternal
And eyes.
benefit society begun
Anyway,
in
please get my
1890
business
by
plan back.
Joseph Cullen
If you
Root.
reach around my back now,
Members
I'll
purchased
reach
life
around yours
insurance
later.
and annuities
That's a
through the
Wikipedia
organization
promise.
that also offered grave monuments. The unveiling of a Woodman monument was a community affair, as shown in this old photo. The monuments are usually inscribed with the organization's Latin motto, which means, though silent, he speaks. Another of Oak Ridge's noted monuments belongs to John Kraus, who for 18 years owned and operated a beer garden that was popular with Springfield's large German population. Kraus's monument is adorned with a photographic image of him set in porcelain. Below it is a bronze plaque depicting his beer garden that featured a pavilion and a bandstand. After John's death in 1894, his widow Emma sold his business, which quickly became an attraction for the lower rungs of society. It eventually closed in 1900, and all that remains of it is here among the dead. Edward Lewis Baker graduated from law school in 1847 and
Go
was
this
admitted to
way.
Illinois State Bar, but he followed a path into journalism. In 1855, he became part owner and editor of the Illinois State Register newspaper. With a promising career under his belt, he married Julia Cook Edwards from one of the top families in Springfield. Julia was also the niece of Mary Lincoln, and through that union he developed a friendship with her husband Abraham. In 1860, Lincoln was with Baker at his office when word arrived from the Republican convention in Chicago that he'd been nominated for president on the third ballot. President Grant appointed him ambassador of the Argentine Republic in 1873, a post he held for 23 years. His tenure ended on June 20th, 1897, when he fell under the wheels of a moving train car that he was attempting to board in Buenos Aires. Gravely injured, doctors were forced to amputate Baker's right arm. At first, his recovery seemed to be going well, but his injury became infected and he died on July 8th. His body was returned to Springfield for burial. On his headstone, a bronze plaque bearing his likeness was placed by his friends in the Argentine Republic as a token of their gratitude for his kind and generous nature. As we've seen, there is history in every corner of Oak Ridge Cemetery. In many ways, America's destiny was forged by the hands that now lie in repose along its grassy slopes. And whether great or small, monuments that stand atop these graves reflect a large portion of Midwestern humility with just a dash of American brash thrown in with measure. Jutting from a hillside is the red clay mausoleum of Orson Stafford. He went to sea at the age of 13, but was crippled in an 1835 shipwreck. After surveying sites for lighthouses on the Great Lakes, he settled in Springfield, where he met and married Eliza Sherman. Mr. Stafford was a jack of all trades, running the gamut from shoemaker to merchant to city council member. He and Eliza had no surviving children. After retirement, they spent their remaining days together in Florida. After their deaths, they were brought back to Springfield for interment. Thomas Reese was the publisher of the Illinois State Register from 1881 to 1933. In 1902, he was elected to a single term as a United States Senator from Illinois. Reese's close friend and the associate editor of his newspaper was Henry W. Clendon. The bonds these two men forged in life continued in death. They and their families now share the same burial plot marked with an elegant neoclassical colonnade.
I didn't mean for things to get this bad. I was
Some
one of being
grave markers
scouts,
display
and I
the
thought that since the
occupation of the
highwaymen
deceased
travel so much,
Cadillac.
they'd be a good source of information.
Fred Donovan's
They
headstone
said they'd
tells
play
of
me
his
for it.
devotion to the
Before I
game
knew
of
it,
baseball.
I'd gambled
In
away all the
1895, at the age of
The only
20,
things I
he
had
entered
left to
the
offer
major
were
leagues
clothes
with the
off my
Cleveland
back and
Spiders
Bean's business
and was
plan.
teammates with legend
Plans in my
Cy
secret
Young.
stash in a little bunker
He
just
bounced
over the hill
around
road.
in various
I promise
leagues, playing
I'll never
wherever he
gamble
could.
again.
In the off-season, he was employed with the Illinois Watch Company until
Help
ill
me!
health forced
Oh,
him
God,
to
please
leave
help!
work and the game he loved. Fred died at a young age of 42. Resting beside his headstone was a simple monument in the shape of a baseball. Tom Brown was a brakeman on the Chicago, Peoria, and St. Louis Railroad. On the afternoon of August 23, 1912, the train he was working on derailed outside of Alton, Illinois. It rolled down an embankment into the Mississippi River, killing Tom and the train's engineer. 5 others were seriously injured. An image of his locomotive is displayed on a simple headstone. William Dyrus was born in Norway and was a jeweler and clockmaker by trade. His clock-faced headstone also reminds us that time is fleeting and that it's 10 minutes till midnight. In real estate, location is everything, especially if you want to be noticed. And the same holds true of the day. Roy Bittelli, a musician who dedicated his life to the interior, knew the value of a good location, which is why he jumped at the opportunity to buy a prime spot just inside the front gate of Oakwood. Later, however, he was surprised when the cemetery informed him that they sold him the plot by mistake. When they threatened legal action, Roy didn't back down, and eventually won his day in court. Afterwards, he built an elaborate sarcophagus that he visited regularly. Tourists on their way to the Lincoln Tomb will often find him playing one of his accordions from the site of his future grave. But rumor has it that Roy died in 2003. He was buried in a military cemetery nearby, and that his beloved accordions were laid to rest in some of the best real estate in Oak Ridge Cemetery.
Those flames are gonna spread quickly!
Susan Lawrence Dana was the only surviving child of Bruna and Mary Lawrence. She was a Springfield socialite who devoted most of her life to activist causes, such as equal rights for women and African Americans. She was also a patron of the arts. When her father died in 1901, she inherited his vast fortune and immediately began work remodeling her family's stuffy Victorian abode. To bring her vision to life, she hired renowned architect Frank Lloyd Wright. His creation was a magnificent example of his prairie style that incorporated a Japanese influence that Susan loved. The house's arched front doorway opens into a series of ever-expanding spaces that continues throughout the interior.
Oh gosh, is that how my
Wright
voice sounds?
designed hundreds of features, from light fixtures
Wait,
to
no, not
skylights and stained glass windows to furniture made of white oak. He also designed easels for Susan to display her extensive collection of Japanese art. Susan lived and entertained Springfield's social set in the house for over 20 years. In later life, however, she encountered serious financial setbacks that forced her to withdraw from the limelight and to take up residence in her estate's smaller guest quarters. By the 1940s, her vast collections had to be broken up and sold at auction. In 1944, the house was sold to Charles C. Thomas, a publisher of medical journals. It remained in his family's possession until 1975. Today, the Dana Thomas House belongs to the state of Illinois and is open to public tours. It has been designated a historic landmark by the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency. Susan Lawrence Dana who suffered from the continual onset of age-related dementia, died in 1846.
I wanted to
When
tell
she
you
was
I had to
buried in her
relocate,
family's
but by
plot in
my
Oak
estimate,
Ridge,
I'm closer to
her
where you
name
ought
was
to be.
added to a
And,
colorless granite
south,
monument.
I think? You'll find me.
But
I know
Susan's
you will.
true memorial is the splendid house she built in the heart of her hometown. Once I loved a spider, when I was born a fly, a velvet-footed spider with a gown of rainbow dye. She ate my wings and gloated. She bound me with a hair. She drove me to her parlor, above her winding stair. To educate young spiders, she took me all apart. My ghost came back to haunt her. I saw her in my heart. A selection from The Congo and Other Poems by Vachel Lindsay, published in 1914. Poet Vachel Lindsay was born in Springfield in 1879, and like his father was expected to practice medicine. Frustrated, he quit medical school after 3 years to pursue his dream of becoming an artist. He studied illustration at the Chicago Art Institute and the New York School of Art, but had no great success in selling his work. By 1905, he was in Manhattan selling poetry on the streets.
but my daddy always
The
said that was
following
for
year,
clowns
he
and
took
babies,
to traveling
not
the country's back roads on
Remember I
foot,
mentioned the reach
giving
around your back?
poetry recitals and
I'm
lectures.
gonna set up
For
Wikipedia
food, he
HQ and
distributed
prosperity
samples of his
starts now.
work that he
I
referred
got
to
scouts
as
collecting hot
rhymes
tips,
to be
and I'll
traded
get
for
maps
bread.
again. And, well, you'll see. With my business plan,
With poetry,
Wikipedia will
Lindsay
go
found
global.
his true
Just
calling
like Daddy
and
always
enjoyed
talked about how it
success
was
for many
before.
years.
Everyone will help us
Much
and
of
give
his
us
fame
donations.
came from
It'll
his
be
highly
great.
animated and
I'll see you
vocal
at prosperity
recitations.
soon, right? Right.
He felt
I
that
can't wait.
poetry should be
Well,
treated as
have a nice time
performance
until
art,
then.
or what he called the higher vaudeville. And in this style, he was years ahead of his time. Lindsay always had a special connection to his hometown of Springfield and its history. While there, he often took distinguished visitors on tours of its historic sites. It was the location of his poem, Abraham Lincoln Walks at Midnight, that enjoyed wide circulation. In this 1917 photo, we see Lindsay at Lincoln's tomb. Lindsay felt his work lacked the critical acclaim it deserved. Critics described his writing as tedious and incomprehensible. He believed his recitals were to blame and wrote to a friend that my tiny reputation as a writer seemed wiped out by my new reputation as an entertainer. However, he continued to perform and publish collections of poems and essays, but his popularity began to wane, and as it did, his money problems increased. In 1925, he married a high school teacher from Spokane, and they had 2 children together. But with his financial woes increasing, Lindsay went on lengthy tours between 1926 and 1929 to support his family and to get out of debt. By the end of it, he was exhausted and deeply depressed.
Hey, this is...
With his mental health deteriorating, he moved his family back to Springfield. Once again, he was living beyond his means, which put him back in financial trouble. Only now it was worsened by his increasing delusions and paranoia that forced him to cut back on touring. If it's a poet's lot to suffer, then Vachel Lindsay did just that. Creatively and financially drained, he took his own life on December 5th, 1931, by ingesting Lysol. However, in reporting his death, the newspapers attributed the cause to coronary thrombosis. His epitaph is only one word, but it speaks volumes. Of all the lives we have explored, there is one that looms above them all. To walk among the headstones of his contemporaries, it's difficult to find anyone whose life wasn't touched by his. It reminds us that before Abraham Lincoln belonged to the ages, he belonged to Springfield. 14-day, 1,600-mile journey from Washington to Springfield,
Beautiful.
Abraham Lincoln was finally laid to rest at Oak Ridge Cemetery on May 4th, 1865. His remains were placed in this receiving vault until a temporary tomb could be built. In December,
Oak
the
County's got its
specially
fair share of
constructed
people
vault
willing to
was
trade.
ready, and he remained there for the next 5 years while his permanent resting place was completed. This stone block marks the spot where the temporary tomb once stood. Today, the Lincoln Monument is not only a shrine to the man who led a nation through 4 bloody years of civil war, it also honors those who fought and died so that nation could have a new birth of freedom. Out front is a bust of Lincoln by Gutzon Borglum, with its nose rubbed to a bright shine by visitors seeking good luck. Within the tomb, bronze sculptures depict Lincoln through his formative years and up to his presidency. Beyond an iron gate is the crypt, containing the bodies of his wife Mary Todd and 3 of their 4 children.
How you survive out here? Nothing wasted.
There is also a cenotaph for their
Alright guys, we're doing okay.
who is buried in Arlington National Cemetery. In the center of the room, a red granite stone stands above the place where the savior of his country is buried. He is gone, but his spirit
Alright
lives
guys, we're in wolf territory now.
people of the world.
Things like that are always
Take. Take. Take.
The time has come for us to end our walk in Oak Ridge Cemetery, but not before we take a last look at its timeless landscape, where the world outside has no sway. Here we walk in the footsteps of those who have gone before, just as others in the years to come will walk in ours. Here all becomes one as we are bound together by what Abraham Lincoln called the mystic chords of man.
shit out of us for a long time now.
Not dying. None. Things are going just fine with these peasant fuckers. We all got our reasons for wanting those massive fuckers to go. And do you believe? No, I fucking can't. Oh my god, my dude. I am in, like, the worst real-life come-down that's ever graced the freaking planet right now. I grow these, herbs. You know, herbs. Don't ask me what kind, it's the kind that work, okay? That kind. I trek around here with a field kit, and, it fell. It fell just over the lip of this weird pavement hole. It's got like a year's worth of homegrown stuff in there. That kit saved me from
In the late
8
50s,
deficiencies and 4
life in the
infections in
suburban
past 6
neighborhood
months
of
alone.
Mission Hills,
I can
far from the
reconfigure this
bustle
stuff,
of
sure, but,
LA,
like, honestly,
was
between
predictable
you and me,
and
my
quiet.
dude, that shit down there is my
At
freaking
7
lifeline.
p.m.,
I won't
families
last till the
living
next
on the
harvest.
10,000
Next
block of
month
Columbus
without it.
Avenue were
People
settling
live
in for the
with all
evening.
this shit these days.
With dinner
Give me my
over
kit,
and the
and
dishes
you
washed and put away,
take it.
people
So you
switched
can
on their
die from
television
violence,
sets to
like
pass
God
the time
intended,
until bed.
Instead of like stepping on a nail.
A few of the programs they had to choose
Let me know
from
when
that
there's more to
Wednesday evening were Edward R. Murrow on KNXT, reporting on the integration of schools in the South. There was the short-lived Western drama Union Pacific on KRCA. KTLA Channel 5 offered Art LeBeau, playing the top music hits of the day. And KHJ Channel 9 was airing the old Our Gang comedies that had been repackaged and renamed for television as The Little Rascals.
Oh, hairy titties.
As
I don't
viewers
see a way
chuckled at
back
the
up, my
off-key
pal.
warbling of
See if you
Carl
can find some
Alfalfa
other way.
Schweitzer, they were interrupted by the wail of police sirens racing up their street. Residents living on Columbus Avenue would later note that while a freckle-faced little boy sang on their television sets, his adult self was being shot to death in their neighbor's house.
Guess Alfalfa gets him. And off.
It was a single, violent act that closed the book on his short life. But the circumstances were but still, come walk with me to that night over 60 years ago,
The water's rising
and
real
separate
heckin' fast,
fact
my
from
guy.
myth,
You should get back to the
surrounding
main
the
hole.
life and death of child star Carl Alfalfa Schweitzer. Carl Dean Schweitzer was born in Paris, Illinois on August 7, 1927. He and his older brother Harold were hometown entertainers. They were known for singing and playing music at community functions. When Carl was 6, the Schweitzers went to California to visit family. While there, he and Harold made an impromptu audition at Hal Roach Studios in Culver City. Their timing couldn't have been better because the studio was searching for fresh faces to fill the lineup of its popular, long-running Our Gang comedy series. The story goes that Hal Roach was so impressed by the boys that he signed them to 7-year contracts on the spot. Carl was given the name Alfalfa, and Harold was called Slim or Deadpan. They joined the 1935 mix of Our Gang mainstays that included George Spanky McFarland, Darla Hood, William Buckwheat Thomas, and Pete the Pup. The first Our Gang film to feature the brothers is Beginner's Luck.
She loves it down there. She just didn't shit on the corners.
Harold strums a mandolin, while Alfalfa gives a squeaky rendition of Children Coming Around the Mountain. With his signature cowlick and off-key singing,
Whatever you do, don't
Alfalfa
panic.
stood out
I'm using up all the
among
panic
kids
around here.
and became an
You're
instant
gonna use
favorite
up
with
all the
movie
oxygen in
goers.
your blood if you panic. Then you
Co-star
double drown.
Darla
It's
Hood
human body
observed
basics.
that when they appeared at the studio gigs each day, Alfalfa got a more enthusiastic welcome from fans than Clark Gable. Alfalfa's sudden popularity had the disagreeable side effect of inflating an already swollen ego.
It's good for us to touch you. Who's Butch?
In the series run, Carl's main rival was played by Tommy Butch Bond. Although their characters were constantly in conflict, behind the scenes the boys were best friends, and remained so for the rest of Carl's life. In Tommy's 1994 autobiography, Dark Right It's Butch, he said that the same was not true of many of his other co-stars. Of his rascal buddy Spanky McFarland, Carl merely tolerated him, and he viewed Darla Hood, his on-screen sweetheart, as a spoiled princess. Darla was far more diplomatic in her opinion, saying that working with Carl was always exciting because no one knew what he was going to do. She also admitted to being a little afraid of her leading man. According to Tommy, Carl either loved you or hated you and would never forget a grudge. And if provoked, he would come at you with his fists. Then there was his devilish sense of humor. He delighted in playing practical jokes on the cast and crew. Tommy recalled the time Carl urinated on the floor lights, and later when he turned on, the stench became so strong that production was halted until the soundstage could be aired out. His prepubescent antics enraged director George Sidney so much that he once threatened that he was going to look him up when he turned 21 and, quote, kick the living out of him. In 1938, Hal Roach sold the Our Gang franchise, including the entire cast and crew, to Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Alfalfa continued with the gang for another 2 years before finally outgrowing the role at age 13. His contract with Metro expired in 1942, and Carl was on his own trying to reinvent himself in a thankless industry. Breaking free of Alfalfa's ghost was not easy for the boy who had once been more popular than Gable. In order to distance himself from the character, he began referring to his more than 60 Our Gang appearances as MGM Short Product. After leaving the gang, Carl worked tirelessly to remain in the limelight. He visited every producer in Hollywood trying to win any role available, no matter how small. There would be many lean years ahead, but he fared better than most of his Our Gang alumni.
West at the Pecos, I wanted to go.
In 1946 and 47, he adapted the Alfalfa character for the Gas House Kids, a short-lived comedy series inspired by the Bowery Boys. The series also reunited him as Our Gang nemesis and best friend, George Bond.
Come on, start laughing. Okay, but my heart won't be in it.
Most of his output at this time was in B movies.
Holy shit! What was that?
Studios. However, he still landed big parts in major studios and worked with some of the biggest names of the day. 6 films in which Carl appeared were nominated for Best Picture Oscars.
Whatever squeaky magic you did
It's a
before, you
Wonderful
have to do
Life
it
in
again.
1946,
Twist some knobs or
and The
jiggle
Ten
some doohickeys
Commandments
to
in
build up the pressure.
1956. Director William Wellman cast him in 3 pictures, the last of which was Track of the Cat with Robert Mitchum, where he played a 100-year-old Native American. In the early 1950s, Carl was seen on television in such programs as Science Fiction Theater and The Burns and Allen Show.
Hello, Mr. Burns. How are you? Yeah, I got the snapshot from development. Oh, yeah.
However, his most steady work on TV was with Roy Rogers and Dale Evans.
The Roy Rogers Show. Starring Roy Rogers. Come on, Doctor. Those tin-horn sheriffs want to tell me what to do. Go for your gun, Rogers.
Over 6 seasons, Carl made as many appearances. But more importantly, he became close personal friends with Roy and Dale. It was a relationship that put the struggling actor on a fateful trajectory.
I'll get even with you, Rogers. You wait and see. You know that kid's headed for a quick grave. The next guy he draws on might take him serious.
Through a business associate of Roy Rogers, Carl was set up on a blind date with Diane Collingwood. She was a 23-year-old heiress to the Collingwood Grain Elevator Company in Kansas. The couple hit it off immediately, and in May 1953, they were married in Las Vegas. But the honeymoon had barely ended when problems began to emerge. Diane was a college-educated young woman hailing from a prominent Midwest family.
I hit it here when I was getting hit. I got my hand like this and tried to shit bad.
And had shown formal education his whole life.
Fucking hands on fire.
By some accounts,
Blame the one
was
motherfucker.
Moreover, it was obvious that the Apollo career reimagined was never going to happen. Their different backgrounds played on Carl's feelings of failure and inadequacy. His young wife was unable to quell his inner demons.
I'm sitting there looking at Tram going, what? Well, my hand's playing.
Sets. Now, instead of childish pranks, Carl sank into alcohol-fueled rages that were too much for Dolly. The couple separated after a little over 3 months of marriage. However, they made several attempts to reconcile, at which time Diane became pregnant.
It's like you put an ice bike and you put a fire.
His parents was the last straw. Diane filed for divorce in October 1954. She later withdrew the divorce suit, and for the next 3 years, the Schweitzers tried in vain to piece together their marriage. While all this was going on, Carl was balancing his acting with a second career as a dog breeder and hunting guide in Northern California. Roy Rogers staked his seat on his business off the ground.
Patients are tired of it now. All these people that, all the ones that haven't been riding and their shit and stuff, are now coming out in the fucking streets where everyone's matter. So the AKs, all those towns are saying, "You're not in our town. Get the fuck out of here." You know. I'd say we give Black Lives Matter
San Suzanne Mountains in Simi Valley was once the home of Corriganville Moody Ranch.
Really?
It was owned by former actor and stuntman Ray Corrigan, known to everyone as
everybody and everything.
From the 1940s to the 1960s, the 2,000-acre ranch served as a western tourist attraction and filming location.
Turn Texas into a giant crater, we can make a trash dump out of it. It's right there next to Mexico anyway.
Acquainted with ranch foreman Bud Stilts.
Joe, you just need a
Stilts was a larger than life character who was perfectly suited to the terrain where he worked. He was a Navy veteran in World War II and had a reputation for being a tough guy who got things done. Stilts was exactly the kind of man that Carl wished he could be. When Carl learned that Stilts bred hunting dogs, he worked out an arrangement where he would rent animals from him to take on his hunting dogs. The meeting couldn't have come at a better time for Stilts, whose tenure at Corriganville was about to end.
The order to shoot us?
On an affair with Crash's wife, Rita, and it would become the focal point of Corrigan's messy divorce that took so many twists and turns it might well have been rolling. Sparks flew on June 2nd, 1954, during Crash.